How do you write a book? Well, that's a question I've been asked many times on this channel over the last year since I published Your Time, Your Way, which is a comprehensive book based around the principles of time-based productivity. But this is not a video about this book. This video is about how to write a book. Now, a quick brief history. I've written, I believe, 5 books. My first book was published in Korea called Story Presentation. You probably can't read that. But this book is written in Korean, not that I can write in Korean. My wife translated the book and I wrote it in English, and then my wife translated the book into Korean and we published this in 2009. And then I wrote a series of ebooks. I think it's 3 ebooks that I self-published on Amazon. And then last year, I managed to get this book, Your Time, Your Way, published. And this is currently available in hardback, softback, audiobook, and ebook, if you're interested. Now, the purpose of this video is to take you through the steps that I follow when writing a book. Now, I must point out that all the books I've written, all 5 books that I've written, were written when I was holding down a full-time job. I am not a full-time writer. I create these videos, I do coaching, I do a lot of other things. But particularly this book, I was a full-time teacher whilst writing this book. And this book here, I was still running my own business and at the same time writing a book. This is one of the key issues here. I know a lot of people will tell me, oh, I'd love to write a book, but I don't have time. I'm working full time and this and that. And yeah, okay. Most people are. When you write your first book, it's very unlikely that you are going to be a full-time writer. You're going to have to carve out the time somewhere. Now, for me, I liked to do it in the evening, and I got this idea from Tim Ferriss. When Tim Ferriss wrote the 4-hour week, or 4-hour working week, he wrote this between, I believe it was 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. in the evening. Now, I'm also more of a night owl, and when I wrote this book, I wrote this, the first draft, the script of this was written at night. I would finish my coaching calls around about 11 p.m. and then I would write for an hour and a half. And it was just a continuous, everyday project, if you like, that I just needed to spend an hour and a half to 2 hours writing the first draft. And that's the first point. The first draft of any book is critical because if you don't have a first draft, you don't have a book. You just have an idea or a few notes sketched somewhere. The critical point of writing a book is to carve out the time somewhere. For me, evening times. For you, it might be first thing in the morning. But you do need to sit down and get on and write that first draft. Now, I believe it was Ernest Hemingway who said that the worst thing, your book is going to be at its worst after the first draft. It's the first draft. It is going to be a complete shambles. It will be a mess. And that's the whole point of the first draft, because you need to get the words down on paper. Well, we said page paper, but you need to get the words out into some format, usually these days a digital format, into a document that you can then start to do what is really the hardest part of writing any kind of book. Now, best-selling author Jeffrey Archer talks about each book going through 14 to 16 stages. What he actually means is there's the first draft, of course, as I mentioned, that's the critical part because now you've got something you can work with. But then starts the editing. You've got first pass, second pass. You've got tons of editing to do. Now, when I was writing Your Time, Your Way, it took me about 8 weeks to write the first draft of this book. But it took me 2.5 years to edit it. because I was never happy with it. The order was all over the place. It was a complete mess. And as Ernest Hemingway pointed out, that is when it's going to be at its worst. It will be at its worst after the first draft. I wasn't happy with my writing, the spelling, the grammar, the order, the structure. Everything was a complete mess. But I had 80,000 words that I could now start to edit down and to make it much, much better, to make it flow. So the first critical part of any book is to get the first draft written. And you don't need a lot of preparation for that. Every book I have written, I have used essentially two tools. I've used Evernote to collect my ideas and thoughts and just throw them into what I would call a project note. And it's been, sometimes the project note can be huge because I'm collecting quotes, I'm collecting this and that. Other times it might just be a single note. I think when I was writing, and this is quite a long time ago now, this is now 16 years ago when I wrote Story Presentation. This one was just a single note, and I'm not sure it was Evernote because I started using Evernote in 2009. So I must have been using probably a paper notebook, something similar to this, to keep my thoughts and ideas for this particular book. However, my writing tool of choice has always been Scrivener for when I've been writing books. Every single book I have written was written in Scrivener. Now, why Scrivener? Well, Scrivener is a writing tool that is designed for writers. It's not designed for writing reports, although you can do that. It's designed for writing scripts and books. And one of the great things about Scrivener is that you can move the chapters around in the side menu. And this is where I started to get the structure of Your Time, Your Way put together by using Scrivener. Now, the great thing about Scrivener, particularly these days, is you can use it on an iPad, you can use it on a Windows-based computer, you can use it on a Mac. And I use Macs. And I remember when I was writing Story Presentation, I would go in the afternoon between my classes to a local cafe and I would sit down in a corner and I would spend 2 hours writing. And it was wonderful. Scrivener was just superb. Now today, back then you couldn't do this, but today you can now put it into dark screen mode, which is what I always do. I go into dark screen mode on a big 32-inch monitor and I just write and write and write. Editing is not a point in the first draft. Editing is where is much, much later in the process. All I'm trying to do is to get the words onto the page and to organize things by chapters. Now, the other thing about Scrivener is you've got a research section down at the bottom where you can start just putting old drafts, old things that you're not happy with. So you think, I'm taking that out, put it in there. So I'm never deleting anything. And the other thing about Scrivener is it's all self-contained. So it's created one file, but even though I've got my research in there, I've got pages that I'm no longer using, I've got discarded chapters, all sorts of things, it doesn't matter because I can keep it and it's all in one file, which is backed up to Dropbox, which is probably the only one, if I remember correctly, that Scrivener recommends is to use Dropbox for your backups. And that's where I keep everything. And as I say, Scrivener is just a superb writing tool. It's the only time I use Scrivener is for writing books, simply because I trust it, I know how it works, and I've been using it for a very long time. Plus, the other good thing is if you are thinking about writing a book, Scrivener is superb because it's not a subscription, and the last time I looked, it costs around about $50, and you get the full system. You don't have to pay a subscription. It's yours, it's on your computer, it's superb. But to finish this video, what I would just like to do is just give you a few little tips that I've learned, as I say, from writing 5 books and publishing 5 books. The first one is you really have got to carve out time every single day. If you're trying to do this like, oh, I'm going to write once a week, The train of thought that you need in order to write a book is just not there. You're going to waste 30 to 45 minutes just reviewing what you wrote the previous week. That's seriously good quality writing time. What you want to be doing is saying, right, Monday to Friday, I am going to sit down for an hour or 2 hours and I'm going to write my book. That's the critical part of this. The first draft particularly, it needs to be a continuous flow. I would also suggest that you allow yourself 3 months of this because it really does take that long to write a book. Now, I've always struggled once I get to round about 20,000 to 30,000 words. For some reason, my brain suddenly seems to seize up. But once I get beyond those 10,000 words, it just flows again and it's right through to the end. But this is the critical part when it comes to writing that first draft. You do need to make sure that you're doing this consistently day after day after day. And actually, preferably, you want to be doing this at weekends too. So if you are serious about writing a book, you've got to allow yourself 90 straight days where you're pretty confident you can sit down and write for an hour, for 2 hours every single day in order to get the first draft written. Now, once the first draft is written, then it's fine. You can slow down. You don't necessarily need to do this every single day. It all then depends on how fast you want to publish the book. Now, I was in no rush. I've never been in a rush to publish a book. I like the process of writing, which is something else you really want to do, which is to enjoy the process of writing. But I would then sit down. I usually would wait a month after writing the first draft, just let it escape my mind before coming back to it and starting to edit. Now, again, I edit in Scrivener, particularly the first few times, because everything is there and I am probably moving chapters around and perhaps cutting chapters and doing all sorts of different things, and Scrivener makes that super easy. But there comes a point, particularly when it gets to like Your Time, Your Way, where I need to be able to then send it to the publisher for him or them to start doing their work. Now, in that case, I need to compile, which you can do in Scrivener, and in my case, both publishers that I've used have actually wanted the format in Microsoft Word, which I can export as a Word document and then send it to the publisher. But I'm never going to do that until I've at least done 3 passes, like 3 edits on the book, so that it's actually beginning to form into a book. And then we start looking at things like spelling and grammar and all sorts of other things. But that's the editing can be slowed down. You don't necessarily need to do that every single day. Unlike the first draft where you want that continuous flow, which means that every day is probably a better to work on that first draft. Remember, there is a cutoff point at that, usually about 90 days. But the editing can be done, as I say, with Your Time, Your Way, it was a 2-year editing cycle. It could have been speeded up, but I was in no rush. And as I mentioned, I'm still working full time. So writing a book is kind of a side project. So it was working on the actual edits as and when I had time. The final part to this is just be patient. Once you've got that first draft done, you can take your time, get the edits done, just be patient. It does take quite a while, but it is a process that you start to really enjoy. I love writing books. In fact, actually, as we're coming towards the end of this year, my brain is beginning to think I really would like to write another book. It's hard, it's tough, I know that. But there is just something very therapeutic, I find, in the evening, sitting down quiet with a little bit of music on in the background and just writing everything out. And as I say, the tools that I've used, Evernote and Scrivener, are just there and they complement that all together. But the 2 most important points is do what you can to get the first draft written as quickly as you can. That's the worst your book is ever going to be. And then take your time, do the editing, and you'll soon find yourself with an amazing book. It's one of the best things you can do in life. It teaches you about consistency. It teaches you about doing hard things, but having a fantastic reward at the end of it. Because, as I say, I've got 2 books now that have been formally published, 3 books that are ebooks that I self-published, and I've loved every minute of writing those books. So if you're thinking about writing a book, my advice is go for it. Just write. Whether it's a novel, a fiction story, or whether it's a non-fiction book, just write. You don't ever have to publish, remember. The publish button I would never go for until after I've written at least the first draft and edited it a couple of times. Thanks very much for watching this video, and if you want to buy my latest book, Your Time, Your Way, I'll put the links in the show notes below.